Public Library's Oral History Project. My name is Paul Ferrell, and I'm here with Evelyn Mace in her backyard on a really nice day, which happens to be September 10th, 1998. And, well, you were telling me earlier, we're in what used to be a walnut orchard, part of the old family group, but let's go way back. As far back as family history you know. Do you know about your great-grandparents?
No.
Not much about them?
No. No. Well, I remember my grandmother, because she lived in the house next door to me.
Now, your grandmother, which side of the family was she?
Mary Frances Peterson.
Peterson. And your grandfather, he was
Henry Peterson. And they lived right next door to me, and I remember going over into her yard. I was at that time, of course, we were living right kitty corner across the street, so I was over with my grandmother a great deal. She loved her garden, worked very hard in her garden, such as spading her orange orchard, but where she had a row of orange trees, and also the walnut grove that she had adjacent to her house. She was, she lived in the big house, but she didn't ever use her kitchen. She had a beautiful wood kitchen, fully equipped, but had the tank house out in back where she did all of her cooking. And a cistern to the side of this. Do you know what a cistern is?
That's
a well.
A well, that's right.
She had that, and that's where she would go and pump and get her water.
Now, the idea of cooking in back of the house is kind of an old idea of a cookhouse, right?
Yes. It was just, well, the picture is here. The picture is here.
A big, beautiful house.
Of her tank house.
Oh, that's the tank house next.
Yeah. Just right out in back. So that's where she always went out and cooked and had her little meal and everything else out there, and then she came in the house. It was a large house, a beautiful home. As I say, fully equipped with its kitchen of those days. A dining room, a double parlor, and glassed in, what do you call them?
Is it a china cabinet?
No, a glassed in on her inner house to the east, where she had all of her plants.
Out in the sun.
Yes.
What do they call them? Solarium.
Solarium.
Is that the right name?
Sort of.
Okay.
Yeah. Nothing open to the top, but it was to the sides, and she raised lots of her plants and had plants in her home there, out there. And she, and up, she yeah, I guess there was one bedroom downstairs, but I don't remember anyone ever using it. So anyway, we will go on upstairs. There were there was a little downstairs, and close to this, what I'm calling a bedroom, was a little, well, I can't say a sink, because they didn't have water on the inside. They had in the bedrooms and whatnot, they had the stand with the big bowl,
Mm-hmm.
and the pitcher, and then the things that you would use right there in the bedroom parts. There was then you went up this beautiful stairway. It went straight up. It didn't wind around, but it went straight down, so that we as kids loved to go up to the top and zoom down.
You
That was
slide
lots
down
of fun.
the banister.
Down the banister.
Mm.
That was lots of fun. And then upstairs, and they had I guess there were 3 bedrooms upstairs, and then they had this big, as I remember, it was just kind of a big iron bathtub sort of a thing. But of course, they had to carry the water upstairs and for their baths. And I don't know how often that happened, of course. But anyway, anything that they had to use water for, they had to pump it out of this cistern and carry it to wherever they were going to use it.
Well, it's a shame the old house still isn't there. But well, what
Yeah.
about your grandparents? How did they ever get to Dixon in the first place? Do you know where they came from? Were they born in Dixon?
Oh no,
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 they came in.
no. Well, it'll say in there, my grandfather, he deserted ship. He was they never did really know, in the Norwegian Navy or something, but he deserted ship and was always kind of, well, I don't think we ever just knew how he got here.
He might have deserted ship in San Francisco or in the east.
No, in the east somewhere.
In the east, and he made his
Yeah.
way to California.
Now maybe Alan would know
Yeah.
more about that, and it might tell in here. I've kind of forgotten.
Okay. Well, now, tell me about some of the early memories as a little girl. You said your grandparents' house basically didn't have plumbing.
No, it didn't.
How about electricity?
Well, it must, by the time, see, I was born in 1910. So by then, you see, because our home had electricity. I don't ever remember having lamps, or I'd go out to visit my cousins that lived out to Uncle Henry's or Uncle Bill, and way back then they had their lamps and stuff, but in town by 1910 we had electricity.
Now you said you'd go out
and water right in the house and everything. I don't remember.
Yeah, water and electricity.
Oh yes, when I was a child, yes, everything was all right there in the house.
Now what about the trip out to visit your cousins and your uncle? What kind of condition were the roads in back when you were a little girl?
Mud.
They were mud.
Mud in the winter, dust in the summer. And my grandmother let's see, her house was there, and just about, see that greenhouse over there?
Right.
Yeah. Well, that's my property too. I have 2 driveways. That used to be well, I'll call it not a barn, but it was kind of, because that's where she kept her horse, and then her buggy. And so when we wanted to go out and see Aunt Laura or Aunt Emma or anybody like that, she hitched up her horse into this little cart that she had, and we rode out to see them and open the gates and all that kind of stuff.
Now right here we're on Maze Street. Now when you were a little girl, was this the edge of town? We're pretty much in the middle of town right now. This was the edge of town.
Pretty much.
We're on Maze between 3rd and 4th.
Pretty much.
Wow.
See, because that, as I say, on the other side of that, there was a creek that came from north and went out here. And so that was the big Peter's place was out there. But right, my children used to just go out and back here, and just out in the back of Alan's place out here, and it was all fields and whatnot.
Well, now you mentioned a horse-drawn buggy. What about cars? I guess there were a lot of Model Ts back when you were small.
My father had my father and Mrs. Curry, and you probably, that's the Schultze family, the Currys. My father had the first battery-driven car in Dixon. I can remember going out to the garage, and there was a shelf built along one side that had all of the batteries that put one in the car, and then I think they could go about 25 miles, and then they'd have to come home and put another battery in. And it was, I can remember it, it was a sort of a little roadster with isinglass windows and windshield. And I guess it went pretty well. Then we had the first, my father had the first real car, a Dodge. And it was a two-door car with real glass windows. And we what I remember about that car is we decided that it would be fun to go up to Tahoe. And I remember that it took a lot of, I think it took my mother as long to get ready to go on that little trip up to Tahoe as it would have been going back to Europe. But
But you say a little trip, that's
yes.
a pretty good
yes,
trip.
Yes,
though,
because the roads were not
that's what I would
very
think.
good.
Uh-huh.
And I remember and they were dirt roads. And I remember that everything was fine. We did the road that you see kind of now, and then you went high, and then you got up to a place where you sort of had to stop, because then you drove down carefully to the lake.
Mm-hmm.
And we were making it real good until we came to the last turn before you started down. And evidently my father says, "Oh, no." And the oil had leaked into the brake lining.
Oh.
So, of course, there were people behind us that realized, because they could see that we were just kind of going. And some of they quickly kind of tried to park their cars and jump out and get a hold of the car.
Mm-hmm.
But that wasn't doing anything. So we got to just the last corner before you really turned down, and he drove into some rocks, and that stopped us.
Nobody was hurt?
No, they said, my mother and I were sitting in the back seat, of course, and my brother was in the front seat with my father, and we all had the windows down, you could turn them down, and he was way out of the side of the car with honk, honk, to no avail. But anyway, we got stopped, and so then I don't know, I kind of forget, because I was in the state of shock by then. They said I turned green. I was so frightened. But anyway, we got down to Lake Tahoe, and of course it was beautiful.
What about
there was nothing there.
Yeah.
Just grass and wildflowers, and there was the let's see. Well, there were the 2 hotels there.
Just 2?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just 2. And nothing else. I mean, around the grounds, it was pretty, and whatnot, but lots of wildflowers, but just nature, just natural.
Was that kind of a typical place people from Dixon went for a little vacation? They go to the lake, I guess. Would they go down to San Francisco? Or?
Oh, heavens, yes. Heavens. Of course, we went to San Francisco twice a year by train. My mother, we went down, and we usually, my father was working, excuse me, my father was working in the bank then, the Bank of Dixon, which my grandfather started. So we would go twice a year, one for a week in the fall and a week in the spring, because we would go there and buy our clothes for fall, and then we'd go back down in the spring and get materials and stuff for our spring clothes. My mother made most of my clothes. She liked to sew, and so I can remember the old emporium. We go and they bring all of these bolts of materials, and I'd sit there with her and be very bored, and I know I caused a lot of. But Ralph, he always went with us, but when we once got there, we didn't ever see him again.
Where would he go?
All over.
Oh.
He just walked all over.
That's your brother.
Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh.
So he, and then of course, later then we'd go out to, he spent most of his time out around the water and down in the old Sutro baths that they had in San Francisco.
Oh, I heard about that.
Uh-huh. Golden Gate Park.
Uh-huh.
Lots of time out in the Golden Gate Park, walking and riding around, and the Japanese tea garden down there, and all that kind of stuff. Very happy, pleasant. I had a very beautiful childhood.
Well, now we're supposed to be talking about Dixon, not San Francisco. But
well, I know, but
yeah.
I get going and.
Well,
all right. I went to school.
Now let's talk about Dixon, because you mentioned your grandfather started the Bank of Dixon.
He was one of the men that started.
One of the men that started, and your father carried on in that business.
And so did Marie's father, Uncle Docky. He got to the point where it just got too much for him to be traveling all over the country as a local doctor, night calls and all of this. So he went into the bank too. So both my father and Uncle Docky but it was my grandfather and I don't know who the other gentlemen were that started the Bank of Dixon.
Now, what about some of the old businesses in Dixon? What were they? I guess there were grocery stores and drugstores.
Yes.
Yeah. Do you remember any in particular?
Well, the building is still there.
The Dixon Bank?
Owned. No, I mean the big hardware store. The big general hardware store that had everything. That is still there.
Was that called Schultz's?
Yes.
Ah.
And that just kind of went from, and that had everything in it. I mean, well, they did have underwear, I guess, because where else should we get them? But they had dry goods and they had shoes and, for men especially.
A hardware store that had
well,
shoes?
Up in front.
Uh-huh.
Up in front, it had other things. But then it went on to the back until it went way out to, well, I think it took in nearly all of that block, because I know the farmers used to drive up to the back end for feeds and things like that in the early days. And then we had, Mr. Kirby had the drugstore. grocery store in the middle of the street.
Somebody told me there were a couple of grocers. One was called Red and White, or a name like that.
Yes. See, the man that started them, then he either retired or passed away, I forget. And then these other kind of chain stores came in. There was I guess, Oscar Schultz. He had a jewelry store, and then along there, and there were a couple of women that opened a millinery store, made hats. And then, of course, we had lots of saloons.
I've heard that.
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. About every other door. Lots of saloons. And
you had a theater, right?
yeah. Mm-hmm. When I was a little girl. Yeah. What else did we have? Oh, and then we had a Chinese restaurant. We had 2 Chinese restaurants. One was very good. I remember white tablecloths and all that. Really very good. Oh dear.
Well, you said saloons, but I think it was when you must have been 10 years old in 1920, they made prohibition.
Oh, yes.
Mm-hmm. What kind of effect did prohibition have on Dixon and all these saloons? What happened to the saloons?
I don't know. I guess they just had to close up. I see. I don't remember. I don't really remember.
You ever hear any good stories of bootleggers or such things going on?
Oh well, yes. We knew exactly who the bootleggers were.
You did.
Mm-hmm. One was. See, it's the names now that I. But heavens, he'd bring his supply. Where did he have his place? Oh, out west of town someplace. And then we had a lot of Portuguese around. A lot of Portuguese.
Now, Portuguese like to make wine, right?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. They lived, most of the Portuguese lived out west of Dixon. Lots of, because I went to school, the DeMellos, lots, and of course we had a lot of dairies. Well, Dixon was known for the Doyle dairy.
The Doyle Dairy.
You probably
I've heard a lot about that. A very high quality dairy.
Oh, very, very uptown.
Now, so the Portuguese did a lot of dairy farming.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Now the Portuguese, they had, of course, you always hear about the May the May Day parade, but the Portuguese had their own.
They
parade?
had their own celebration.
What was that like?
Very colorful. Of course, it was mainly right over here in the Catholic Church and whatnot. And then they had a big. Where did they have that? They had their parade. What is it? The Knights of Columbus?
That's a Catholic group.
Uh-huh. And they'd have their parade down to the park, I guess. Because I remember that they used to cook, beef or whatever in all that
I heard that.
sauce.
Sopa?
Yeah, something like that.
Some kind of beef.
I didn't ever
served
go,
it with
but
some bread.
that was quite the thing. I remember that, and they chose, like we had our Mayfair. They would choose a young girl in town to be the queen. And I can remember that my daughter, here we weren't connected with the church, but I think maybe it was through the bank, because so many of them banked with the Bank of Dixon. And so I know my daughter and her cousin were chosen to ride in the parade and whatnot. And she had a big velvet cape and all that kind of stuff. But that was part of Early Dixon.
Yeah, I spoke to Vernon Dutra.
Oh,
His
yes.
father
Yes.
led the parade.
Oh, heavens, yes.
He showed me his staff.
His staff and Oh, yes. That was really a very colorful parade. Just old timers and whatnot.
Well, that's, I seem to always keep hearing about the two ethnic groups, I guess you call them, the Germans, the Portuguese. Those are the two big groups in Dixon.
Yeah.
And Portuguese tended to be dairy farmers.
Yes.
What about the Germans now?
Until the Doyles, you see, the Doyles came from Canada. But that was started, that dairy was started by the Tim family. And then the Doyles took it over and made it to what it.
Oh, the Tim's a German family. But the Doyles took that from the...
Yeah. Oh, the Tim family, heavens. Did you say you talked to Malcolm?
I talked to Malcolm.
Yeah.
Real nice guy.
Malcolm and Muriel and Bob. Yeah, that. Of course, they're all my age, and we were all good friends. Went to school together.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask you about, is school. Now, of course, you went to Dixon High School. What about grammar school?
Oh, yes.
Which grammar school would you go to?
The first one that we had, right down the street. It was a little...
It's still a school now?
Yeah.
No. Yeah, that's right. Same location.
Yes, but it's been... Excuse me.
That's
I have to
okay.
move.
Yes. There you go. That's fine.
I'm making noises that I shouldn't be making. Did I blow anything up?
No, everything's fine. So, yeah, now you went to the grammar school just around the corner practically.
Oh, just down the street, so I could just run back and forth. And
So what was school like?
well, at that time, we didn't have any preschools or kindergartens. We just started first grade.
Hmm.
So my mother decided that I wasn't ready to go to school until I was 7 years of age, because she said that if I started too early, I would be too young when I got out of school. So anyway, I went through that part of my school life a little older than most of my contemporaries. But it was, we just went to school. And we didn't have athletics in our schools then like they do now, of course. We at recess time, we just go out in the back and jump rope or play ball. We had baseball games and things like that.
Now, were all the different grammar school classes different ages put together, or did you have different grades?
We had different grades.
Okay.
Oh yeah, we had. Well, it was a long building. Yeah, it was different grades.
It's not like some of the country
I remember,
schools.
I think we had the first and second were together. And then from the 5th grade on, then we went 5th, 6th, and 7th grade. We didn't. And then after we finished the 7th grade, then we went on to high school.
Now,
we didn't have junior high or anything like that.
The high school was, you graduated from that good old high school, that beautiful building I've seen.
Right.
That they've tore down a few years later.
Yes. Yeah.
That's a shame.
Yeah.
Well, what was high school like then?
Oh, lots of fun.
Lots of fun?
I was very popular in school. So, no. But it was. I thoroughly enjoyed my school life. I took, algebra, geometry. I didn't get much further than that. I don't think I would have been too good in calculus and things like that. Math wasn't my best subject. But we had our social life, and like our big dance, which was always the junior prom, and got all dressed up in our fancy clothes and whatnot. And graduation was usually outside with in those days, of course, we all just wore white dresses, and the boys wore white shirts and things like that. We didn't have any gowns and mortarboards or anything like that.
You said in the grammar school you didn't have any athletics, but of course you did in high school, did you?
Oh yeah, we had basketball and girls baseball, but we didn't. It was just in the schools.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't travel. The boys, they just had their own. As I remember, we just had. But they didn't go around yet to other schools and like they do now.
Mm-hmm. I talked to Otto Royer.
Oh yes.
And We talked a bit about baseball.
Oh, well, I hope.
He was a few years ahead of you there.
Oh, yes, he was in my brother's class. Otto and my brother Ralph Moss and Otto Royer, and they, in fact, they started playing football, but of course they didn't really have any uniforms or whatnot. But I can remember Ralph coming home pretty well bruised and battered, and of course my mother had it. When he went over to Davis, I'm deviating a little bit, but when he went over to Davis and really played football for the Aggies over there, he even kept that quiet for a long time because she didn't believe in physical conflicts.
That's quite a conflict, football.
In those days.
Yeah, without the helmet, or the hard helmet.
I'll say. Yeah.
Well, you mentioned the dances. You know, I talked to Margaret Carpenter.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, and she just loved the dances. She spent a lot of time talking about the dances and how very important they were in social life.
Oh, yes.
Not just high school, but...
Oh, no. We, well, I can remember where we first started going to public dances was out at Tremont. The Tremont School had they had like a little band, local people and whatnot. And then everybody, the families, the Tim family, what are all the people out there? But anyway, it was just kind of a big family affair. The mothers and fathers and the children would come, and then the little ones would kind of get tired, and they'd go to sleep on the bench and whatnot. But it was lots of fun. That's where Otto Royer and all the Royers and the Tims and Petersons, that's where we started dancing.
No.
But I loved to dance. I still would like to dance.
A jet plane flying overhead here.
Yeah.
Right directly overhead.
Oh, we are.
That's pretty loud.
Every once in a while, they change their flight patterns. But I noticed that now we have a couple of them during the day and once in a while at night now.
That's too bad. Well, now let's see. You graduated, and not long after you graduated, the Depression struck.
Yes.
How did that hit Dixon?
Well, let's see. I just stayed home for a couple of years. My mother and father both had beautiful voices.
Mm-hmm.
My father sang in the Church of England, And my mother had a beautiful mezzo-soprano voice. So I was endowed with their talents. So but I didn't really care about going on to school. And then, of course, right then, it would have been sort of a strain, too, to send me away to school. My brother, of course, it was easy for him because he just was going over. He graduated from Davis over here, and then, of course, he went further. But so I just stayed at home, more or less, but I did go back and forth to Sacramento. I was with a voice teacher in Sacramento, so I kept up that way.
Now, a voice teacher, that's
Singing.
You were teaching singing?
No, I was the student.
You were a student.
So then, after things recovered, or the depression seemed to be over somewhat, I went to Mills College in Oakland, and and even down there, I stayed there for 2 years and studied voice and all that kind of stuff, and I did a great deal of singing. So when I came home, of course, then our whole family were singing in our church here in the choir. So I mean, I was raised in the church, and as I say, both my father and mother sang in the church choir. And then I did a lot of Elda Smizer, that's Alan's well, they were cousins. But anyway, then Elda and I did. She had a beautiful soprano voice, so we did a lot of singing around in Dixon and whatnot. Weddings, funerals. For any social occasion and whatnot. So that's what I.
Your father was at the bank, so he must have. Well, I don't know. He must have seen a lot of people going through hard times, I suppose, during the Depression.
My father. My father could have told a lot of things, but it was very seldom that you could get my father to talk about the old times in Dixon. He would always say, you know, I lived through those times. I'm not interested in talking about them. I'm for the future. I'm only interested in the future and what we're going to make. Hope to have it be.
Well, something that continued through the Depression and goes on today is the other parade we didn't talk about, the May Day parade and the May Fair.
Well, that's just going on.
Well, what was that like back in the earliest times you remember? I'm sure it's changed a lot.
Well, I really don't. Well, I remember the parade, the big parade, beautiful floats that we had. Worked all night with tissue paper and whatnot, and decorating cars and riding in cars. And I remember there was a man that, well, he was part of the family, but not, he was part of the Tim family. He lived down around the bay, but he came up here, of course, to visit. And he had a Duesenberg, a Duesenberg Roadster. And this Roadster had two little seats that pulled out, so that here was the car like this, and these little seats, you just pulled them down and you were just sitting there. And I remember riding in the parade on one of those little seats out there, my cousin and I, sitting there. And well, my cousin was queen one year, and I was an aide. So I, had to get all dressed up and ride in the parade that year. And I don't know. But then later on, in regard to May Day and the festivities down there, my sister-in-law, my brother, of course, we were interested in gardening anyway, and my sister-in-law was a member of the Omega Nu Society in Woodland. And down at the fair, we had booths that we went in and decorated. I mean, we had, what were they? I guess 10 by 10. And they would choose a theme, and you would work out these 10 by 10 booths to carry out the theme. And my brother and sister-in-law and Slim and I did that for quite a few years. And we won blue ribbons each year that we did it. But of course, Ralph was very, Slim didn't do anything. He just sat there. But the three of us really worked very hard, and Ralph, of course, was a builder. He could do all the lighting and everything. So those were happy days.
Now you said Slim, of course, your husband, Alden.
Mm-hmm.
He was involved with the Mace Meat Company. Is that right?
Yeah, one of the owners.
One of the owners. Now that was a big employer, one of the biggest employers of Dixon.
Yeah, Dixon wouldn't have existed very long if it hadn't been for the meat plant out there. So when it first started, and Bruce, the older brother, had a plant over in Winters, and then he got the bright idea that Dixon, he wanted to come over here. So, of course, it was just a small place. The corrals were out and back, and they brought the cattle in and killed them. There was the killing floor. And then the chill room and then the offices. And of course Slim was, he sold all the meat. I mean, he could sell anybody anything, because he knew because he talked with all the meat packers and whatnot in Los Angeles and San Francisco, the Italians and whatnot. So, and Slim was a good storyteller, terrific storyteller, so that he'd just get on the phone, and I think he could have sold anybody anything. So that was.
So the Mace Meat Company shipped meat all over the place.
All over. Mm-hmm. And I have a picture of him in the house there where when they first started selling meat in San Francisco, he was up almost every morning at 2 o'clock. Went out to the plant and had his customers, few customers, and it was just an open air truck, no windshield or anything, and he just got in that and took the whole sides of a beef. You see, they split them through the middle, and delivered them there to his customers in San Francisco. Rain, fog, whatever. Of course, he at that time they did have a ferry that he usually caught in Vallejo. But now that was after a little while. As a rule, he had to go right into Oakland. Of course, he had customers in Oakland too. But yeah.
Earlier we were talking about some of the early cars and trucks and things, but Dixon, of course, is a farm town. Now, out in the countryside, they were using horses and all before?
Oh yes, they harvested with horses.
Tractors came along a bit later than. Someone told me pretty darn late.
Yes, because I know my brother, when he was in high school, all the high school kids, the boys, tried to get the harvesters were huge, big things, because they, cut it and it'd have to come into where the thrashing, apparatus and whatnot, and then it would finally come into a funnel, and then you'd have to stand there with the sacks, and as the stuff came in, you'd shake it and shake it and shake it until it got until it got full. Then you pushed it to one side, and then there was another boy or another man that had the needle that sewed it down to the other end, and then they pushed it onto a truck and took it in, brought it into town or wherever.
So that was high school boys that were filling the sacks and sewing them? And these big harvesters were pulled by
horse-drawn
horses?
Yeah.
I imagine there were big teams of horses.
I think not more than four.
4 horses to pull
to a harvester.
To a harvester.
And then you see, then in those days, they went from farm to farm.
You mean the...
They would harvest what, now like, well, they would be out at Uncle Henry's, we'll say, and they would harvest everything there, and but then the family, they would harvest Uncle Henry's, and then they would eat there at noontime for 2 or 3 days. Then the group might come on up to Uncle Bill's house and do the harvesting there. But then the women, you see, would go and help prepare the big meal that they ate at noontime.
So a meal was part of their payment?
Yes,
Kind of.
that's what the wives did. Because I can always remember going down to Aunt Laura's and staying down there for the day while Mother helped cook and whatnot and feed the harvest group and whatnot, and they'd come on and go on to another place, and that's what happened all over, you know. The Royers had their harvester, and they did more out east of town, out with the Buckleys and that whole bunch.
Now, earlier you mentioned that you're related to Dr. Hall. And,
Yes.
Yeah, I heard he was a pretty good doctor.
Oh, he was a wonderful doctor. I can remember going with Uncle Docky. He had a little
Now, Uncle
Roach.
Docky is Dr. Hall.
Yeah.
Okay, I thought that's what
Docky
you meant.
to me, though.
Docky.
He had a little roadster, and so lots of times when he'd go on his rounds, and I would ride with him. We'd go, you know, way out to Binghamton or someplace, and Docky loved to sing, and he could not carry a tune. But we'd go along, and the bear went over the mountain, the bear went over the mountain, and things like that. We had a lot of fun.
But Uncle Docky couldn't sing like the rest of the family.
No, he couldn't carry a tune, but we sang anyway, and thoroughly enjoyed it.
Well, speaking of doctors and illnesses, a couple of people, let's see, I think it was Malcolm Tim, he's a little bit older than you, but he remembers as a little kid in school.
Not much. No, he's not much older than I.
Well, he remembers the Spanish flu epidemic of, I think it was 1918, when the kids were, do you remember that?
I remember going down in the basement of our library with my mother when the women were there rolling bandages.
Rolling bandages for the soldiers?
Yeah.
So you have some memories of the
yes.
First War.
Oh, yes. Oh, she's cleaning.
So you,
oh, yes.
The women rolled bandages and sent them off to France.
Yes, I remember there was a Cowden family, and Max Cowden, they lived in the white Spanish house over here, and I can remember him coming home, and a hole right in some shrapnel had hit him and lost a part of his face. Yeah. my brother, we escaped. My brother was just always a little younger. So he didn't ever have to, when he went over to university, he belonged to the, they all had to go, what did you call it?
The draft board.
Mm-hmm. Where they wore uniforms and had
ROTC.
Yeah, thank you.
He did that over at David.
Yeah.
He was too young for World War I, so I guess was he too old for World War II?
Well, yes, he missed them all.
He's a lucky one.
Yes. Yes, our family was in that respect.
What about the flu, though? It happened at the end of the war, the Spanish flu epidemic. Do you remember about that?
Yeah, well, that's when we were down in the basement. Okay. Oh, and the flu. Oh, heavens, yes. That was bad.
I think Malcolm Tim told me they closed the school.
Yes.
His school, I guess the Tremont School. For
and we all ran around with masks on our faces.
So you don't spread germs, of course.
But of course. Here all we did was gather up all those germs and breathe them in and out. But anyway, we never went outside without them.
Really? Whenever you would leave the house, you would? Oh, I thought it was only when you were in school.
Well, yes, but when we went into stores and whatnot,
you wore them?
No, we wore them a lot.
Well, speaking of disasters, the war is a disaster, but Dixon, they were pretty lucky, I guess. Any great disasters in Dixon? No big earthquake? No. I guess there were some fires. We felt a couple of earthquakes once in a while. Of course, when I was going to college, living right down there in the Oakland Hills, that was the usual thing. I mean, you could feel it, or hear the old buildings start to creak, and I'd look out of my window, and the eucalyptus trees would be swaying back and forth, but I was never in any real, disaster. No big disaster. I guess Dixon's been lucky that way.
Yes, very. Oh, we've had some, like we had a hotel in town once that burned but no one in the fire department was volunteer, but you had nothing, just disaster-wise. Used to have huge grain fires before irrigation. See, that was the main thing that we had around here was grain, and my heavens, I remember one that we had that started up north here and went right down to the water in Rio Vista, out of Rio Vista. Just went through the whole country.
Just big fields of grain burning.
Just took the whole thing. I imagine it was when we were having one of those north winds that we have every once in a while. And there was nothing there to stop it, you see.
Yeah.
So,
what about the winter floods, winter rains? I guess that must affect some of the farmers outside of town here.
Oh, yeah.
I think Sadie Peterson told me a couple of good floods she survived.
Yes. Yeah, we've had some, but nothing again that came. See, we live on
Dixon's on a hill.
Yep, what we've always called the Dixon Ridge.
Oh, I haven't heard that phrase, the Dixon Ridge.
The Dixon Ridge.
Uh-huh.
Know where that is, I don't know.
It's a low ridge, you hardly notice, but it is higher than other places.
Uh-huh. Mm-hmm.
Well, you mentioned a volunteer fire department, which makes me think of a lot of these organizations I keep hearing about in Dixon. There was a women's club that helped out things. There's a Rotary Club.
Improvement Club.
The Women's Improvement Club.
Women's Improvement Club.
Were you a part of that?
No.
No? Yeah.
No. I was really not a joiner.
You're not a joiner.
I had lived here all my life. I did a lot of work in the church.
Well, that's another important
She
get-together
was very
place.
involved in
I think we got another jet aircraft.
Right over the side. Well, you see, they have a pattern.
That one wasn't too bad.
I keep thinking of all the gasoline that they waste, but I guess they aren't wasting it.
I hope not. Well, anyway, yeah, the church groups. Now, that's an important social organization.
Oh yes, Our Ladies Aid did a lot of what we call the Ladies Aid, and they put on a lot of. We had a lot of big dinners that were open to the public, you know, and we made our little money that way. And then my sister-in-law and I, we like to get involved, because Romaine and I, she was my sister-in-law, but I didn't have a sister, so she was my sister, too.
Mm-hmm.
She's a wonderful person. She was our first kindergarten teacher in town. But anyway, then we got to putting on fashion shows, and that was a lot of fun.
Fashion shows.
Mm-hmm.
As a money-raising activity.
Down at the park, at the big building down there. Boy, you made a lot of money with those. So I kept, you know, along with raising my two children, I was pretty busy.
Well, we've talked about a lot of things. What do we forget to talk about as far as Dixon's concerned here?
Alrighty.
What do you like about Dixon?
Oh, I don't know. I like it because it's a nice little town. Everybody's always, of course, I don't know many people in town now. That's the only thing.
It's great.
I'm not involved in activities anymore, so I don't know many people in town. I go out to the store, out to hometown. Never, don't know a soul. But, well, it was a nice, because it was, in regard to shopping, it was close to Sacramento. it didn't take too long to get in the car and go to San Francisco.
Bad day.
I'm sorry.
Well, that's not too bad. Now, let's see. Now, you're saying shopping. San Francisco's not so far. Yeah.
Well, we used to go to, and then I had season tickets when I started going to, when I went to Mills. My brother had a Cadillac Roadster, whatever you call them those days. And so I'd get a group of my friends and we'd go over to the opera at night and whatnot. We were always enjoyed opera and good music and whatnot. That was, and well.
It's good to be near San Francisco.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's Sacramento. We would do things, although Sacramento was backward very much in regard to well, it wasn't really until Sacramento built their little community theater out there that
The Memorial Auditorium.
Well, yes, the Memorial Auditorium, but of course that place, the acoustics were not very good over it. We used to go over there when the Aggies had their boxing matches, and that was more fun. But they were a little backward about, musical things most of the time. If we wanted something like that, we'd go to San Francisco, as I say, to the opera and to the Geary Theater and things like that.
Well, then I guess we talked about everything. Anything else we need to add?
Well, I think
We covered it.
covered it pretty well.
Okay. Well, I just want to thank you for talking.
Of course, I've traveled a lot. My father being an Englishman, we went over to see the family over there.
Oh.
So I went to Europe when I was 2 years old.
2?
My mother and father, Ralph was 7, and I was 2, and Uncle Docky, and Uncle Docky and Aunt Tilly and Marie, the 4 of us. That was the first trip, and we were in England, and then we went over across the water, and we went over to Germany and to Switzerland, and that was the first time, and we went another time when I was older, when I was a child. But then since then, my husband and I, we've traveled all over.
I've done a bit of travel myself.
That's, yeah.
We'll turn this off and talk about that.
That's lots of fun.
I love it. Okay.
Yep.
Let me shut
right.
this off, and I want to say thanks again for.
Oh, well, it's been
talking.
very, very pleasant.
It's been a lot of fun.